Alright, there's no use beating around the bush with this one. In 2010, Adventure Time happened to us. It then proceeded to absolutely change everything. Like magic lightning bolts from a radical wizard spray painted upon the side of a proverbial van, pop culture itself was dazzled and shocked and changed and maybe even a little disfigured forever by this weird little show about a boy in short shorts and his dog/brother, voiced by Bender from Futurama. And you know what? I too was changed. 15 years old, obsessed with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure before it was cool, rewatching the final battle of the second Gurren Lagann movie on constant loop. To say I was changed fundamentally as a person by Adventure Time would be an understatement. I've been doing a soft series of videos starting in about 2020 about all the various shows that I had watched and absorbed in my youth that made me who I am today. Ones that are radically important to my developing mind. Most of them were when I was 12. You'll find most of your favorite things you experienced first when you were about 12. Gurren Lagann, Earthbound, AVGN, all things that molded me into the weirdo making verbosely overwrought videos about Chowder and Centaur World. Adventure Time was like those, but it was different. With Gurren Lagann, I still to this day rewatch it and muse about how excellent its story and themes and action are and feel no regret or embarrassment whatsoever. In fact, I probably love it more and more with every rewatch, of which I do at least once a year. With Adventure Time though, I have not watched it since the 5th season of the show. If you were to ask me right now if I even liked Adventure Time, I would probably say, nah, it's not for me. But that's not what 15-year-old Wyatt thought. Or 16, or 17, or even 18-year-old Wyatt thought. 15-year-old Wyatt loved Adventure Time so much. It was almost certainly a little bit frustrating to his friends and family. He poured through every bit of trivia and production info there was on the internet, absorbed every scrap of the pitch Bible, learned the names of all the quote-unquote storyboard artists, and then found himself watching and re-watching the first season of episodes ad nauseum on digital cable video on demand. Again, probably to the annoyance of everyone around him, especially his parents. I think you could make a reasonable argument that Adventure Time was my favorite show, period, when it first came out. But that was 10 years ago, and Wyatt is 26 now and making this video, and that kid that would incessantly quote it at school and talk about Marceline and how funny the Ice King is long dead somewhere. So what happened to him? This isn't even a rhetorical question. I seriously don't know the answer, and I'm asking. Who am I asking? God, so that he'll finally punish me? You guys? Me? I've exhumed the corpse of 15-year-old Wyatt, at least what I could find of it. And with power not unlike the Lich from the hit cartoon show Adventure Time, I wanted to revive that corpse. I wanted to take myself back to the past. Not to watch a shitty show that sucked ass, but to watch the single most impactful cartoon of my entire life. Over the course of 2022, I want to take a true deep dive into my soul, mind, body, and heart, and see what stares back from the abyss. And instead of running away from it like I have all these years, I want to shake its hand. That is all to say, I'm going to do a full series retrospective on Adventure Time, season by season, but with the ulterior motive of picking my own brain and my own life, what I was doing when these seasons aired, what stuck out to me, and why, or at least what I think was the reason for all of this. It's going to be fun, it's going to be embarrassing, it's going to be a little sad, but I hope by the end of this, you will all learn something about yourselves, not just me. So come along with me, and let's examine that seminal first season of the series in part 1. When Adventure Time Season 1 came onto the scene and casually changed television overnight, it wasn't necessarily out of nowhere. Cartoon Network was in the perfect position for a pendulum swing back into relevance. I'd argue the best time for a network to revolutionize a medium is at its nadir, when absolutely nobody expects anything good from them at all, and then they drop their gigantic balls and dick on the table and crush everyone under the weight of their meat. CN was in such a place that even if the crappy reality TV, thinly veiled writer's strike loophole shows that they had didn't exist and embarrass everyone with their existence, the original content that they had was not exactly awe-inspiring either. Yes, Chowder and Flapjack were hilarious and now are classic shows beloved by many, but that style had been long in the tooth for over a year that they came onto the scene. I've talked about this in my Chowder video, but that show is certainly cut from the same cloth as shows like Billy and Mandy, a loud, mean show with this Gen Xer cynicism-laden, postmodern, fuck you for caring about anything attitude that had kind of run its course in the 90s and early 2000s.
How long have you two lovebirds been going steady?
I'm Chowder's girlfriend, and Chowder is my boyfriend, and we're totally going to be together forever and ever. And now, we're holding hands!
A paradigm shift was upon us, though, as we left the Bush era and entered the neoliberal nightmare land that is the Obama era. If you're watching this in 2022, we have entered the sequel to that era, so maybe it is the best time to confront my complex personal thoughts on a cartoon. Thank God I procrastinated this video for 2 years. Adventure Time was queued up to be an unstoppable juggernaut far in advance, purely on the merit of being a notable show on Cartoon Network at all. Mix in the fever pitch of modern nerd culture hitting its first big peak in around 2010, and the average CN fan growing from Kids with Attitude in 2006 to emotionally complicated Weezer teen in 2010, and you got a powder keg for those who want to feel things and stuff about cartoons, and also watch cartoons about feelings and stuff. I was definitely over the hump of self-loathing by the time that I was 15. New school, new friends, new me. Instead of that creepy, depressing anime guy who read all the Hannibal Lecter books for a book report in 8th grade, I had transitioned to the nerd guy with a beard that is way too happy all the time. Like an even less charismatic Travis McElroy. I was quote-unquote confident enough in my masculinity to listen to songs from Renaissance-era Disney movies on my phone in gym. I did not join theater, but I was that guy. That guy, however, was far better than being beaten up and ferociously bullied for being kinda awkward and liking Pokemon in 8th grade. As shallow as it was, people kinda liked me purely because I was the guy in school that had a beard, and fuck it. That made me happy because they were happy. I too was queued up perfectly to get knocked on my ass by the wrecking ball force of the feel-goodness that was Adventure Time in the spring of 2010. That being said, for many people, Adventure Time began before Cartoon Network, and definitely before any writer's strike. No, it began with Nickelodeon of all places, and more importantly as a viral video on the internet. The pilot for Adventure Time, produced for Nick in 2007, was nothing short of a revelation to cartoon nerds of a certain age. I was just young enough for it to pass me by until the full show dropped, but even watching it after the first season had began in 2010 made it clear how destined for greatness this show always was. It really was like nothing else on TV at the time.
How dare they trifle with me? They can't possibly think they can win!
Why don't you pick on someone your own size?
Fool! Your powers are no match for my magical crown! My powers!
Rewatching the season, it was a pretty fascinating experience overall. I hadn't realized just how much I had internalized all those years ago, and I knew every single episode front to back. All at once I thought, I get it. This totally is a big deal. And also, yeah, I totally get why they couldn't keep this up for more than a season. What does that mean? Buckle in, buddy. Look how much time is left in this video. Overall, though, I felt that the first season has held up extremely well, in general. There are issues, and we'll get to those, but for now I want to focus on what works and how it clicked with me now and as a kid. The two main characters, right off the bat, are the greatest achievement. It was no wonder the show was originally titled Adventure Time with Finn and Jake, as their dynamic is the crown jewel upon which the Mountain of Riches was begat. Finn is an outstanding protagonist, especially by 2010 standards, perhaps the closest any single cartoon has ever come to matching Son Goku from Dragon Ball. Yes, even over Aang from Avatar, don't at me, most protagonists in Cartoon Network shows at this point were either narcs, like Mac from Fossil for Imaginary Friends, or Adam from My Gym Partner's a Monkey, or were comedically too dumb to live types like Billy or Chowder. Finn effortlessly mixed the two modes and came out as perhaps the first three-dimensional character to ever come out of a show like this from Cartoon Network. I know those in the comments are going to say Ben from Ben 10, but when you watch an anime-style action show, you expect the characters to be well-rounded or at least more realistic. Not so much with a silly and frivolous show like Adventure Time, so it was a big deal and a huge surprise on this rewatch. I think a lot of people assume because the show was more, well, straightforward, it certainly isn't the right word, because the show was more simple in its first season, that the characters suffered from that too, and were more flat and less developed, but that's just empirically false. From the very first episode, or at least the first aired episode, it feels like the core cast is all completely figured out. Bubblegum is very clearly more than just a delicate princess or a precocious crush. I mean, she's shown to be a super genius scientist and an amoral necromancer the first time we see her. Finn loves adventuring and fighting and dumb kid shit, but when the going gets tough, he takes responsibility and gets serious. As bizarre as it was at the time, making the first episode Slumber Party Panic displays all of his modes in one episode.
Oh, wait, I thought of a better one. Yes, 2 + 2.
Solve it or die.
As does the B episode, Trouble in Lumpy Space. We see that a character can be dumb as bricks, but have a high emotional intelligence. That they can be a do-gooder, but know when it's alright to relax and stop being such a narc. Violent and aggressive, but calm, and a pacifist when necessary. All these seem contradictory, but Finn is so rich and multifunctional as a character, because as the only human in the cast, he is our only mirror staring back at us amidst the insanity of the land of Ooh. Jake, likewise, is the counterbalance to Finn, being chilled and laid back when Finn is worked up, and more responsible and guiding when Finn is in over his head. A great and very natural brother-like dynamic, despite both being very different characters at the core and, different species altogether. Penward coined the term buddy moment behind the scenes, in that at least once an episode, no matter how dire things got, there will always be a buddy moment between Finn and Jake to bring things down a notch and remind the audience of their bond. This technique extends much further than just Finn and Jake, and forms the bedrock of the tone of the series, but you see it most easily in Season 1 with these two, as they're always the focus point in the first season. Later in its run, Adventure Time would be defined by its slow burn narrative and deep lore. I'm using quotes for deep lore there. I imagine plenty of fans of shows like Steven Universe or Amphibia got their feet wet with Adventure Time in its slow rollout of myth building. I got my start with Kids Next Door and, anime, but Adventure Time was still a welcome addition to that. That kind of plotting, however, does not really exist in the first season. In fact, I would describe the plotting and premises of nearly every single Season 1 episode as wild improvisation. Now, this isn't uncommon in the world of board-driven cartoons. In fact, it's probably the standard at this point, especially in the world of board-driven cartoons. But there is something more distinctly whimsical and kind of absurd about how it's handled in Adventure Time. In Billy and Mandy, a stupid non-sequitur episode plot will be treated as cynically as possible, and the joke is on you for expecting it to amount to anything. In Adventure Time, when the first episode begins with Finn accidentally summoning a horde of zombies and then ends with a math quiz between demigods, you're like, sure, why not? Because such things are given out in a uniquely genuine tone, despite their insanity. I had taken on a fake it till you make it philosophy in regards of being happy after having a horrible fucking time in middle school, and to some extent still kinda kept that barricade up in high school. Adventure Time, however, was an actual real escape and a warm hug, one that wasn't based on me escaping the present to live in the 90s with Disney Renaissance films and AVGN episodes. It was real, and it was the present. Much like Gurren Lagann had offered me solace in a time where I was hopelessly sad as a tween, Adventure Time made that faux happiness real just by being itself and not being ashamed of it or ironic about it. The joke, as it were, is that it's not a joke. That's not to say that the show isn't funny. Even after a decade, many of these episodes made me laugh uproariously.
What's wrong with me?
You're a sociopath.
Episodes like Prisoner of Love and The Witch's Garden are still extremely funny bangers. I think I've watched those two episodes so many fucking times that I could Rain Man recite them all from memory while watching them. Tree Trunks is still one of the most delightfully bizarre and shocking endings of any cartoon episode I have ever seen to this point. By the way, the commentary track on that episode is incredible. It's Penn Ward's mom and the old lady that plays Tree Trunks talking about just how much they love Penn and barely even acknowledging the episode they're apparently watching and commentating on. It seriously brings me to tears every time I've listened to it. And yes, I own the first season on Blu-ray and no other seasons. I'm a complicated guy. Another striking element right off the bat is the music. From the chill ukulele strums of the intro, not to mention the genuinely incredible zoom-in shot of the first half of the intro sequence, to the wonderful and blissful Island song. It even sounded so new, so 2010. It's almost uncanny how much the show laser-targeted my 15-year-old sense of taste. The only thing that could possibly hit me harder would be like some sort of half video game, half shonen anime, comedy action show, maybe with like music from a guy that worked on Shovel Knight. I don't know, that probably doesn't exist. Season 1 also introduces a lot of the most enduring characters for the remainder of the run, Marceline and the Ice King being the biggest, but I was always very fond of Lumpy Space Princess. I guess I just always liked girl characters that really sucked. My favorite Evangelion character is Asuka, my favorite Peanuts character is Lucy, and we'll psychoanalyze that can of worms at some other point. Lumpy Space Princess is such a beautifully stupid design too, and such a vague idea of what the fuck she even is or why she exists. Why does she have a werewolf-like curse when biting somebody? Why does she live in a different dimension? It's just delightful and such a ballsy move to fucking make this the B episode of the first episode that they showed us, and just how much nonsense they expect us to accept on the fly. Ice King, though, was, and probably is still my favorite character, long before we knew anything about Simon Petrikov. I have mentioned before in other videos, but I absolutely love the types of ineffectual bad at being bad types of villains that Ice King embodies. He's such a complexly pathetic character, even as early as Season 1, that I cannot help but love him and want to give him a pat on the back and say, hey man, you'll get him next time. It's extra hilarious in this case because he is such an unstable and obsessive menace to every single woman in the world of Ooh. By all rights, he should be a despicable character, but it's so pathetic and absurd that it just loops back around to being purely funny. And need I say anything about Marceline? While I question just how big she became, I almost can't really blame them. Evicted is possibly one of the most iconic episodes of television, especially to us Millennials. While I was already firmly sold on the show, that episode was absolutely the proving grounds for how good the show truly was. It had everything. Great buddy moments, sexy vampire lady, action, emotion, a song, and it made the world feel so much bigger than Finn, Jake, Bubblegum, and the Ice King. By introducing a new, basically main character like 10 episodes in, it sets up their precedent that the status quo can and will change. can grow further as the series goes on, and that Marceline only gets one more episode in the season. She is the focus of the premiere of the next season. All of these elements would be attractive enough to 15-year-old Wyatt, but what really got me fascinated in Adventure Time from the moment I glimpsed a 10-second promo on Cartoon Network was that art style. Everyone and their grandma knows this art from a mile away, and it has probably, to the chagrin of many classic cartoon fans, become kind of the default art of 2010s. But at the time, after years of Ed, Edd n Eddy and Billy and Mandy and Chowder and Flapjack, after years on the periphery of watching mainstream cartoons, this cutesy doodlecore post-ironic simplicity struck such a chord with young Wyatt that it changed the matter of my brain forever. Deep down, as many times as I told myself I want things to be badass and with robots and shit, and ugly screaming faces, the truth was, and is, I equally wanted to indulge in cuteness. Adventure Time would not even be 1/10 as popular if it weren't for that art style. So many kids like myself would look at it and think, I can draw that. And whether or not they could was irrelevant. The seed had been planted and the relatability and humanity had been achieved to a mega monstrous degree. I bet money that people that became cartoon nerds because of this show became so after thinking about the charming, unprofessional art style and then realizing a human had made this show. The idea that we had been consumers all our life and now we can finally directly acknowledge what we had consumed and that we enjoy it. I know because that was what it was for me, and yes, we'll get into my dark night of the soul later in this series in regards to parasocial relationships and the problems therefore. I want to believe that at the core, everyone just wants to give rather than take from the soul of creators that they enjoy. Now, of course, there are some notable opinions from the past 6 or 7 years that are still being hurled at the show's art style and its hypernova influence on pop culture, that it is perhaps not based in red-pilled, but in fact cucked and blue-pilled. I will get into the dreaded Cal art style thing in the future, but it's worth noting that plenty of people my age, the average age of the people getting really worked up about modern cartoons art styles, did dislike the way that the show looked when it first came out. But that leads me to the negative aspects of the show. As much fun as it's been to learn to love again and ruminate nostalgically on my relationship with the first season, I would be remiss to not mention a few nagging issues. When it comes down to it, I only really have 2 major issues that need to be addressed as they'll be affecting the show as it goes forward. First, as groundbreaking and refreshing as the tone of Season 1 is, that one season is about as long as it lasts. The disconnected frivolity of the first season does set it massively apart from both its comedy brethren and its action brethren, but it almost immediately runs its course. By the end of the first season, I caught myself thinking, okay, but what's next? A novel idea can only be novel for so long, and while Adventure Time built a fucking empire on this, it becomes clear going forward that the writers could not keep making it fresh. They would slowly begin to dramatically alter the show tonally. It would end up far removed from the Poots on Newts beginnings of Season 1. I'm not even saying I did get sick of it, just that I foresaw the writers and audiences moving on. Maybe getting too ambitious for their own good in a lot of ways. Part of the fun of going season by season is seeing that gradual evolution in these digestible chunks, and it's a shame that the Adventure Time that built the empire had to die for that empire to grow. It could have been a 2-season underground phenomenon that stayed in its lane, but for better and for worse, it shifted gears. Second, and most importantly, is, to be quite blunt, they cannot end an episode properly at all. Now, plenty of beloved shows cannot end properly. Looney Tunes is notorious for having abrupt and inelegant endings. Even my beloved Muppets usually ends a skit with an explosion or a big monster coming out and eating somebody. But it's a little more of a big deal with Adventure Time. To be honest, at this point, it's not a big deal actually. It's something that maybe even adds to the imperfect charm of the show. But it's the beginning of one of the series' biggest flaws. This can lead to some hilarious results. I have already professed love for the bizarre, horrific ending of Tree Trunks, but plenty of episodes do hinge on some sort of emotional or intellectual conclusion, and when you have to cram the resolution into literally the last 30 to 15 seconds of the episode, it leaves a lot to be desired. I wish I could say this is a growing pains issue and they would overcome it, but instead it kind of becomes a fundamental issue of the show going forward. So much so that it's kind of an issue of many of the shows that came after Adventure Time, like Steven Universe and my dearly, dearly beloved OKKO. With that said, Season 1 of Adventure Time was still an excellent romp through my nostalgic mind palace and really reinstated a lot of love and appreciation I had for the series that had kind of lost over the years. It's kind of one of the most perfect Season 1s of any show I've seen in a way. Even if it will go on to grow and do bigger and better things, it in and of itself is complete and unique with just the first season. In a way, that's what I want from this video series too. The first video is pretty dense because it functions as an introduction to the whole series, and an introduction to the topic I'm discussing on a baseline, and a full opinion piece on its own. However, there's so much to talk about in the coming videos, and while they probably won't be as dense as this one, we'll continue burrowing into the heart of Adventure Time and the mind of Wyatt, as next episode we talk about the friends I made in high school, the joy and terror of sharing something you love with others, the introduction of mythology to Adventure Time, and what Season 2 gained and lost with its momentum. This has been Adventure Time. I'm Wyatt Phillips, and see you in a couple months with Episode 2.